Remembering how many COVID fixed penalty notices have been dismissed through courts and the CPS, it makes you wonder if any of the penalty notices have been upheld, seeing as they were practically all unlawful. Well, wonder no more, because Transport for London were raking it in, and although I don't have the figures for the other COVID waves, it seems that Transport for London made, during the Omicron wave, the softest of all of them so far, between November the 30th, 2021 and January 26, 2022, almost £60,000. 58 grand, to be exact, taken from the pockets of hard-working people in London who were already struggling with the lockdowns affecting their work and income for almost 2 years. A Freedom of Information request by the Taxpayers Alliance has found that Transport for London received £58,200 from 554 fixed penalty notices handed out to London Underground and London bus passengers, plus those on other forms of public transport run by TFL, failing to wear a face mask during that time. It amounts to more than £1,000 per day brought in by Transport for London enforcement staff. This was a gift for you from the London Mayor, because he loves you and he cares for you. Yeah, alright, some people will argue that he did what he had to do. Some will say that he's helped to stop the spread of COVID. Some will say he was following the science. To those of you, I say rubbish. The science has shown for a long time that this was never as bad as being made out. It showed that Omicron was likely to be the wave or the mutation that affected everybody and helped us all to get that herd immunity. I mean, it's easy to say that lockdowns worked. Look how many people were saved. How do you know? How do you know people were saved because of lockdowns? We didn't have a test of each, did we? We didn't try not locking down and locking down and seeing that lockdowns worked and not locking down didn't. So we don't know. It's not been tried. It's not been tested. Not here at least. Anyway, I digress. Transport for London has been called out for using the COVID restrictions and face mask mandates on public transport as a cash cow. Elliot Keck, Investigations Campaigns Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, said, COVID rules shouldn't see commuters treated like a cash cow. Conditions of carriage already allowed enforcement officers to refuse service or to eject passengers failing to wear a face covering without reaching for fines. With the pandemic behind us, public bodies must ensure all unnecessary COVID regulations and charges are brought to an end. I completely agree. Most stations, not all granted, but most stations have somebody working on the barrier who could refuse you service if you don't have a face mask or didn't have a face mask, but they didn't. Well, they did, but they didn't. They let a lot of people through and subsequently went on to fine them for it. To be fair, these penalty notices shouldn't have been used anyway, unless it was somebody who admitted to not having a face nappy and not having an underlying health issue that prevented them from wearing one. Because Transport for London, nor anybody else for that matter, should be demanding your medical history as a condition of carriage. The government's own website said you don't have to wear one if you have underlying health conditions which prevent you from wearing one, and you don't have to prove it. Thankfully, Transport for London has lost the power to issue fixed penalty notices to people not wearing masks since the end of Plan B restrictions. Sadiq Khan at the time said, following the government dropping all legal COVID restrictions and in light of falling infection levels in London, it is expected that wearing a face covering will no longer be a condition of carriage on the Transport for London network. However, we know face coverings remain a simple, effective measure that give Londoners confidence to travel, and following clear advice from public health advisors, TFL will likely continue to recommend their use on the network. I urge passengers to be considerate of their fellow Londoners and continue to wear a face nappy where appropriate, unless exempt. So he even mentions exemptions, but all through the restrictions, we saw videos of people being challenged, explaining they're exempt and still being issued with fixed penalty notices. CEO of London Travel Watch, Emma Gibson, said research in February continued to show that people feel safer using public transport if passengers were wearing a face covering, with 69% of people feeling this way in the latest survey by Transport Focus. She said, we also know that this figure is even higher for older people and those who use public transport more regularly. Well, I personally, I'd feel safe if everybody stayed at fucking home when I go out. I hate people. That's not going to happen, is it? I'd also feel safe if face nappy wearers stayed at home, so people don't have to go about their day being confronted, or didn't have to go about their day being confronted by people who have been scared out of their minds by propaganda into thinking that they had the right to lambast others for not wearing one. Caroline Russell, who chairs the London Assembly Health Committee, said at the time the pandemic is not over, and London as a global city is uniquely vulnerable to exposure to any new variants that might arise. I'm not sure why it's uniquely vulnerable. I'd have thought it was just as vulnerable as any other city with an airport. She said the TFL message about wearing masks on public transport has helped reduce transmission of coronavirus, given people confidence to travel, and kept staff and passengers safe. People are still getting sick, so I hope TFL retains simple mitigation measures like mask wearing being a condition of people are still getting sick, so I hope TFL retains simple mitigation measures like mask wearing being a condition of carriage on public transport to keep Londoners safe. Dr. Jackie Davis, a London NHS woketard, who sits on the British Medical Association's board, said there are millions of clinically vulnerable people who will still be afraid to use public transport. At the same time, hospitals are really struggling to deal with backlogs and waiting lists. We should be helping keep others safe by helping the NHS. It only takes a little compassion. Okay, now, I thought that save the NHS stuff was over with. Clearly not. Look, it only takes those who are clinically vulnerable to wear a face nappy themselves if they choose to. You see, it's about choice. You can choose to be afraid, hide away, bleaching your hands raw, or you can act with some semblance of critical thinking, and instead of listening to the bullcrap that you're fed through your TV, thankfully I don't watch anymore, and the bullcrap spewed from the mouths of mainly people who will find some kind of benefit in you wearing a face nappy, and do your own research. Of course, Transport for London, Sadiq Khan, blames the government's restrictions for the Transport for London mask mandates. Nothing quite like taking a bit of responsibility for mugging off hundreds, potentially thousands of people, because let's face it, we already know a lot of penalty notices were not paid and many more were appealed and won. Nearly 60 grand mugging people off, and people fell for it. Unbelievable. Big thank you to channel supporters, especially these guys. Your support is truly appreciated. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts, as I know many of you will. And until next time, stay safe, look after each other, film the police and other officials.